Story 1. This happened about a week ago. For context, I work in a school which had just recently installed cameras at our gates. Originally, you just had to buzz the gates, we would get a call and they would say who they were and we'd let them in. Some people straight out lied to us about their names, which caused, problems. So because of that, we recently installed the previously mentioned cameras, so we could look at the gate whenever someone buzzed in. At around 12 p.m., we had a call from a parent who dropped their kid off late, saying she had seen a man on a motorbike with no license plate wearing a full-face blacked-out helmet. Someone in a van was also following behind him without a license plate as well. They were driving outside the school real close together, and she thought it was a little suspicious, so she called in to let us know. This didn't worry us too much at first. Initially, the school was protected quite well, with some very firm security gates. At about 1 p.m. or so, about halfway through lunch break, most of the kids had finished up eating. They were playing outside on the field or playground together. From certain sides of the school, you could see the kids playing on the field from the gates. Outside, the teachers didn't really supervise those kids. It was a high school after all, and kids don't really need to be supervised at that age. As I was doing my own thing, I peeked over to the monitor for a moment, only to see that motorcycle drove up to the gates, and said van parked up on the opposite side of the street. The man on the bike buzzed in and said he was here to pick up his kid. I went through the standard protocol and asked who he was, to which he only replied, John Smith. I then asked the name of his child, and he only said Jack Smith. Two kind of very common names, of course. I asked for a second time to verify, maybe the mother, and they said, well, you know what, Mary Smith. Yet again, another very generic name. But I had no life at the time. I pretty much knew the majority of the students' names from just seeing them regularly. And I had never heard of a Jack Smith in this school. I didn't even know why I'd bother to ask these questions. It was clear this person was not a parent, and our security cameras were quite well hidden, so I assumed the person asking them didn't see them. I asked them to take off the helmet they were wearing, which caused them to fret as we look around. The man looked back at his friend in the van and made a let's go gesture. They spun a 180 and sped off. I had no idea how to handle the situation, but at least they didn't get in. And the fact that they took off in such a hurry would generally mean they were up to some bad things. I guess I should have gotten a colleague to call the police while they were still there. We did call the police after, but we never heard anything back. Story 2. My friends and I generally were the adventurous type, but our latest escapade was a step too far even for us. It was a chilly autumn night, and we'd all met at Kate's house to explore a new residential development that had recently been built on the outskirts of our town. I was accompanied by Kate, Brant, Carrie, and Kate's younger brother, Kent. Kate had always been the leader of our group. She was confident, strong-willed, and always looked out for her younger brother. She had long brown hair and always wore it in cornrows. She said it was badass. Her eyes were brown and she had a sharp wit and was very observant. Brant was a tall, kind of lanky dude, and he loved to joke around. He was sharp and quick, and he could always make us laugh. He had straight blonde hair and blue eyes. Carrie was the quiet one. She was always thoughtful and introspective, and we always turned to her for advice. She had long red hair and wore it in a braid. Kent, Jane's younger brother, was only 8 years old, while the rest of us were around 14. Kent was energetic and was always curious, with messy blonde hair and green eyes. We walked from Jane's house to the new development. As we got close, it was impossible to ignore the feeling of unease that had settled in our stomachs. The road leading up to it was dimly lit, and the silence was only broken by the rustling of autumn leaves. As we entered the residential area, we could see that it was indeed partially built. The houses were all identical, and their structures were still being put together. The silence was unnerving, and every sound we made echoed through the empty streets. I could see the fear of my friends' faces, but we were all trying our best to be brave. We finally entered one of the particularly partially built houses. The inside was still incomplete with some bare walls, and debris was scattered on the ground. The air was musty and the smell of new drywall filled our noses. As we made our way up to the second floor, we heard footsteps. It was too late to hide. There was someone coming, we all knew it. We stood there hoping it was just another kid or someone else like us, just exploring. The footsteps got closer and we saw a man approaching us. He was wearing all black with a baseball hat that covered most of his face. He seemed harmless, but we were still somewhat nervous. We introduced ourselves, and the man told us his name was Jack. He seemed to be at least 30 years old, but he was friendly enough, so we didn't think much of it. Jack asked us what we were doing there, and we told him that we were just exploring. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with our answer, and then started walking away. We all breathed a sigh of relief, thinking we were in the clear. We kept exploring upstairs for a few more minutes. Kate and Brant went into one bedroom while Casey and I were in another. Suddenly, Kate burst into a panic. "Where's Kent?" she cried. "He's not with you," I answered. That's when we realized that Kent was gone. We looked around for a few minutes, but he was nowhere to be found. Then we looked out the window, and we could just barely see that man walking away. Kent was walking next to him. Kate flew out of the room and down the stairs. The rest of us ran after her. Kate screamed as she got close to them. We could tell the man was leading Kent to his car. It was too dark outside to tell what make or model it was, but I think it was a kind of gray sedan. The man turned around when Kate screamed. Then he ran into his car and floored it out of there. Kent just stood there in shock. Kate ran to him, grabbing her brother's arm. She pulled him close and hugged him. Then the whole group walked back to Kate's house, not saying a word. Once we were safely there, we locked all the doors and told our parents everything that had happened. The police were called and they searched the entire area, but the man was never found. We still talk about what happened from time to time, but not when Kate is around. She gets really upset. And understandably so. I know she still feels really guilty for almost allowing a brother to be kidnapped. The thought of what could have happened to Kent still haunts us all to this day, but Kate especially. We all promised never to venture into that development again, but the memory of that eerie night hasn't gone away, and most likely never will. Story 3. 4 years ago, I trained a new worker, who was honestly a nice guy at the time. Early 30s, seemingly healthy, very much into skiing. He had a girlfriend and all that good stuff, etc., etc. They seemed very balanced and healthy. I'll just call him Dave. We had another longtime co-worker who was sort of Mr. Popular with managers, but honestly kind of super annoying. Really large personality, and people similarly couldn't only take him in small doses, just as people had to. You know the type. It was basically the poster boy of a Facebook frat boy who would randomly dance on the job and freestyle lame lyrics, laugh at his own jokes, and that kind of stuff. It was extremely annoying, but anyways, I'll just call him Bob. Now, before I explain, I should tell you this workplace just sucks hard. Any review from anywhere comparing it to basically working outhouse duty at a concert. It's a large factory with no windows, toxic management, long hours, and it was very hard on most people's mental health. So anyways, roughly into a year, Dave's employment, things started changing. He and I were mutually friendly to one another pretty much every day. We would have a long civilized discussion about interesting things. You know, the usual. But something was really out of place when he started talking about his new beliefs. You know, flat earth theory, reptilian-run government, and even some talk about how hot furries are. It was really unlike the calm Dave from before, who was super rational and mellow. I sort of shrugged it off and said it's probably just a phase, or he's just having issues or something. Fast forward a few weeks, Dave has seemingly took a lot of interest in Bob. and sort of developed some of his mannerisms, but in a much more endearing kind of way. Copying his silly dances and goofy faces, and it seemed harmless, but as months go past, he continued to dance and play around more and more, to the point that he had to be asked to stop by the supervisors. I mean, it's good to be happy, but this was a bit much. He would even be moving around at the morning meetings, kind of like a kid that couldn't sit still, using all the same mannerisms and phrases as Bob did, like he was kind of a clone of Bob or something. This really started to creep out Bob, and kind of the rest of us too, to the point that he switched shifts, so we didn't have to see him. We figured maybe he was on drugs or something, but he was usually a very logical person and against all substances, alcohol, weed, anything really. He was also vegan. I guess where things changed for the worst is where Bob started seeing a new hire at work. She ended up becoming his girlfriend, and they moved in together and all that good stuff. And this is when Dave shows up to work using Bob's name, even signing himself into the logbook as referring himself as Bob all morning. Then later that day, he stands up at the work table screaming, throws his hands up in the air and says, "I'm in love with Bob's girlfriend." The whole place went silent. Only whispers were heard, after he ended up standing in the corner with the broom, sweeping nothing for the next several hours. It was really weird. He wouldn't turn around from the corner either, not even when tapped on the shoulder or called by name. The only time I saw him away from that corner was when it was time to go home. He waited until everyone left before he did. Unfortunately, my job being data entry, I'm always amongst the last ones out. Despite both of us being the last in the building, I did my best to act normal when passing him in the hallway. I glanced at him. He was looking directly at me, head tilted down, making a bared teeth, mouth open, growling sound, eyes as wide as they could be. It was really creepy, like he was possessed. The next day, our boss decided Dave needed to go to the hospital, so we actually made an appointment and got him in with an Uber. He was put on leave for about a week. The security guards who I was friends with told me he was showing up in the middle of the night trying to sign in for work and peeking into windows. He would use the card reader sometimes at 2 or 3 a.m., basically just to swipe it. Surprisingly, a week later, Dave comes back and seems somewhat normal, almost like he had no recollection of anything he did. He even wrote an entire love poem on his phone in that time, which surprisingly was better than I thought, but still a little odd. I kind of noticed it was all just love lyrics, kind of really bad ones, from like the 60s, all kind of cheesy jazz lyrics, All things seemed to normalize with Dave. He stated he really wanted to hang out with me and go for a hike and throw knives at trees and just kind of let loose and stuff. I guess I sort of didn't agree or disagree. I told him that I'd get back to him on that. I was a little on edge, honestly. He asked me later that day if I was still up for it, and I said, unfortunately, I had other obligations. He said, well, I guess I can't throw knives at your face then, huh? I just looked at him, not really knowing how to react to that. I mean, that's pretty weird, right? I told the manager about that, and he kind of just scratched his head uncomfortably and shrugged his shoulders. Anyway, Dave ends up finding Bob's address due to a work get-together where everyone was invited. He eventually finds rocks and sticks and weird formations on his doorstep like little voodoo dolls or something, and we all collectively knew that it was most likely Dave. Things got really weird when they actually looked at the footage of Dave looking through the windows at night. He was also scratching the windows with his nails, calling out Bob's name repeatedly, whispering, "Bob, I need to tell you something. I need to tell you something." This is when our manager finally decided to take action and agreed to fire Dave. 4 years later, Dave still talks and stalks Bob's new ex-girlfriend. She had to get a restraining order against him. he makes new Facebook accounts and adds all 200 plus workers who used to work there. They get shut down, but he just uses a new name each time, just a different selfie. He sends a message to each one of us as well, saying, "Hey honey, it's Bob from work. Maybe we can go camping someday. I can bring my costume." Honestly, there are too many red flags to mention on this one. I really hope he gets help before it's too late.